The navigation screen on the old Silverado glowed green in the dark of the parking lot. I had just gotten the keys an hour earlier, standing in my uncle's driveway while he explained, with the specific patience of a man who has already won, that Grandpa Dale had wanted me to have something personal, something with sentimental value, and that the truck had been his daily driver for 9 years. He said it like he was giving me a gift. I sat in the driver's seat for the first time, in the dark, and I found the GPS still mounted to the dash, still plugged in, still holding a charge. I pressed the button that said home. It gave me an address on Clearwater Road in Missoula that I had never seen before in my life. I sat there and looked at it for about 30 seconds. Then I put the truck in drive. But to understand what I found when I got there, you need to know who my grandfather was and what this family did while I was gone. My name is Jess Malone. I am 34 years old. I am a wildland firefighter with the Lolo Hotshots, a Type 1 crew based out of Missoula, Montana, assigned to the Lolo National Forest. I have been on the crew for 9 years. Before that, I spent 3 seasons as a General Forest Service firefighter with the Bitterroot crew, starting at 22 years old, which means I have been walking into burning forests for 12 years and have not yet found a reason to stop. The work runs from late May through October most years, sometimes into November if the season extends. During that time, I am in fire camps across the western United States, sometimes in Montana, sometimes in California, or Oregon, or Idaho, or New Mexico. Available by satellite phone on a 2-hour callback window, not by text, not by email, not reliably by anything. The first year I made crew, I was handed a 1-page assignment list and a gear bag that weighed 45 pounds and told to be at the staging area at 4:30 in the morning. I was there at 4:15. The crew superintendent at the time, a man named Frank Okafor, who had been running hotshot crews for 23 years and who spoke in the complete sentences of someone who had learned that imprecision cost time, looked at me standing there in the dark and said, "You packed your own gear?" I said yes. He said, "Good." That was the entirety of my orientation. I understood it perfectly. The thing I valued, the thing that organized everything about how I worked and how I trusted people, was reliability. You show up when you say you will. You do what you said you would do. You do not make a person account for what you promised and failed to deliver. I had built my entire professional life around that principle, and I had extended it to my family without examining whether they deserved it. That was my error, not stupidity. I assumed people operated the way I operated. I was wrong about that for a long time. My grandfather, Dale Malone, kept a blue wool cap on the hook by his back door from October through April every year. It smelled like wood smoke and the cedar chips he put in his garage to keep the mice out. I am telling you this because I kept that cap when I cleaned out the back seat of the Silverado, and I have it on the hook by my own back door now. I noticed it the morning after I got the truck, and I stood in my kitchen holding it for a moment before I put it up. I had no reason to think anything was wrong with the estate. That was the problem. My grandfather was 79 years old when he died in September, the last month of my fire season. He had been a Finnish carpenter for 40 years, retired, and had spent the last decade of his life the way he had spent most of it, quietly and precisely, maintaining things, building things, keeping records in a green composition notebook he stored in the top drawer of his desk. He owned a house on 3 acres outside of Missoula that he had bought in 1981 for $42,000, which was worth significantly more than that by the time he died, and which I had assumed, without checking, would be handled according to whatever he had arranged. My Uncle Roy is my grandfather's son by his first marriage. He is 58 years old and has spent most of his adult life in real estate in Missoula, which means he understands property values, transaction timelines, and the specific windows during which decisions can be made before anyone thinks to ask questions. My Aunt Barb is his wife. She is the kind of person who organizes family events with the efficiency of someone who understands that the person who controls the agenda controls the outcome. Together, they had been the closest family members to my grandfather geographically for the last 15 years, which was a fact I had treated as simple geography, and which was, I would eventually understand, a position they had cultivated. My grandfather and I were close in a way that did not require a lot of conversation. I came home between fire seasons and spent time at his house. I helped him split wood in October. We watched football on Sundays. He taught me to read a topographic map when I was 12 years old, on his kitchen table with a USGS quad sheet and a mechanical pencil, explaining contour lines with the patience of a man who understood that some knowledge takes time to enter correctly and cannot be rushed. I used that skill every single fire season of my career. I thought about him every time I opened a map. He called me in late July of the year he died. I was in a fire camp outside of Redding, California. The call came through on the satellite phone, and I stepped away from the staging area to take it. He sounded tired but not alarmed. He said he wanted me to know he had updated some paperwork and that things were arranged the way he wanted them. He said Roy was handling the executor duties. He said, quote, 2. I told him I would see him in October. He said good. That was the last conversation we had. He died on the 14th of September. I was in New Mexico on a complex fire assignment. I got the notification through the crew superintendent, who pulled me aside at briefing. I flew home on emergency leave 4 days later. By the time I landed in Missoula, the estate process had been running for 72 hours. I want to be specific about what I found when I got there, because the specific details are the thing. The house had already been listed with a realtor, a woman from Roy's office who had a lockbox on the front door, and a staging consultation booked for the following Tuesday. Roy had obtained a court order authorizing the listing under expedited estate administration, citing perishable asset value in a hot market. The personal property inside the house had been divided at a family meeting held the Saturday after my grandfather died, 3 days before I landed, which I had not been notified about because, Roy explained, he had not wanted to pull me from an active fire assignment for a meeting that was just preliminary. The furniture, the tools, the woodworking equipment, the coin collection my grandfather had kept in a lockbox in his closet for 40 years, all of it had been allocated or sold. What remained for me, set aside in the garage in a cardboard box, was a set of hand tools, a framed photo of me and my grandfather from 2015, and the keys to the Silverado. I stood in that garage and looked at the cardboard box and the keys on top of it. The garage smelled like cedar chips and motor oil. I picked up the keys, I put them in my pocket. I picked up the box and put it in the back of the truck. I called my cousin Andrea that night, Roy and Barb's daughter, who was the person in the family most likely to tell me something true. She said the meeting had been Roy's idea. She said she had assumed I was being kept informed. She said the coin collection alone had sold at a dealer in Missoula for $11,000, and that Roy had distributed the proceeds from it and several other items at the meeting as preliminary distributions from the estate. She said she had thought it seemed fast. She said she hadn't said anything because Roy was the executor, and she assumed he knew what he was doing legally. I thanked her and got off the phone. I sat in my apartment with my fire gear still half unpacked in the corner, and I looked at the framed photo from the cardboard box that I had set on the kitchen table. My grandfather and I were standing in front of a fire lookout tower in 2015. Both of us squinting into the sun. He was wearing the blue wool cap. Something settled in my chest. Not grief, though that was there too. Something more like the moment in a fire when the wind shifts and you stop moving and read the terrain again from the beginning. Because the situation has changed and your previous assumptions about it are no longer valid. They had no idea what they had just done, and I was going to let them keep not knowing. For a while. Now I want to be clear about where I was at that point. I had a cardboard box, a truck, and a GPS with an address on it I did not recognize. What I did not have yet was any understanding of how long my grandfather had been quietly preparing for exactly this situation, or what he had put at that address, or why he had never mentioned it to me directly, but had left me the one item in his estate that would take me straight to it. What I was about to find on Clearwater Road was going to change everything I thought I understood about my grandfather, about Roy, and about exactly how much time a person can spend building something in secret because they know, with the precision of a man who reads topographic maps and keeps green composition notebooks, that the people around them cannot be trusted to deliver it. The address on Clearwater Road was a self-storage facility called Mountain West Storage. A single-story cement block building with orange roll-up doors set back from the road behind a chain-link fence with a keypad gate. It was 11:30 at night when I pulled in. The gate was locked. I sat in the truck with the engine running and looked at the keypad for a moment. Then I looked at the keyring I had taken from the cardboard box. There were 3 keys on it. 2 I recognized as the truck's ignition and spare. The third was a small flat key with a yellow plastic cap and the number 71 stamped into the metal. I got out. I walked to the keypad and looked at it. There was a sticker on the side that listed the facility manager's after-hours number and also, in smaller text, a note that read, "Existing key holders may use unit key for after-hours access via pedestrian gate." There was a secondary gate to the left of the main one, a standard door with a keyhole. I put the key with the yellow cap into the lock. It turned. I walked through. Unit 71 was the 4th door on the left in the 2nd row. I rolled it up. I found a light switch on the right wall and turned it on. My grandfather had been a Finnish carpenter for 40 years. He built things precisely and he stored them precisely. The unit was approximately 10 feet by 15 feet and it was organized the way his garage had always been organized. The way his workshop had been organized, the way his green composition notebooks were organized. Everything had a place, and everything was in it. There were flat files along the left wall, the kind used for storing architectural drawings. 4 of them stacked. There were 2 banker's boxes on a metal shelf. There was a fireproof document safe the size of a small suitcase sitting on the floor with a combination lock. And on the shelf above the safe, there was a green composition notebook with a yellow sticky note on the cover that had my name on it in his handwriting. I picked up the notebook first. The first page had a date at the top. March of 2012, 11 years before he died. That was the first entry. He had been maintaining this unit for 11 years without telling a single person in the family. The note on the cover was not a letter. It was a list of instructions, written in the same mechanical pencil handwriting he had used to teach me contour lines on a topographic map. It told me the combination to the safe. It told me the contents of each flat file. It told me the name of an attorney in Missoula named Gerald Spence, no relation to the famous one, who held the original copy of a document my grandfather had executed in 2012 and updated most recently in 2022, 1 year before his death. I did not open the safe that night. I photographed everything in the unit with my phone, every shelf, every label, every surface. Then I locked it, walked back to the truck, and sat in the dark parking lot with the engine off for about 4 minutes. The mountains were a black outline against a slightly less black sky. It was cold enough that I could see my breath against the windshield. I drove home and called Gerald Spence's office at 8 the following morning. His assistant confirmed that yes, he was expecting my call, that my grandfather had left specific instructions to be contacted by Jess Malone upon her request, and that Gerald had a copy of a document I would want to see. She asked if I could come in that afternoon. I said I would be there at 2. The first call I made after hanging up was to a woman named Diane Cooley. Diane had been a probate and estate litigation attorney in Missoula for 26 years. A former hotshot on another crew, a woman named Petra, who had left firefighting to go to law school and who now practiced in Bozeman, had given me Diane's name 2 years earlier in a context that had nothing to do with my current situation. I had kept the name in my phone under the note underscore underscore, quote underscore 3 underscore underscore. I had not known why I would ever need it. I called her at 8:15. Diane picked up herself. She had the voice of a person who had been up for several hours already. Unhurried and direct. I gave her the summary in about 4 minutes. She asked 3 questions. What was the date of the expedited sale authorization on the house? What was the date of the family meeting where the personal property was distributed? And had I been formally notified of my status as a named party in the estate? I answered the first 2 from memory. For the third, I said I had not received any formal notification. Only a phone call from Roy telling me the truck had been set aside for me. She said, quote 4. She paused and then said, quote 5. I met Gerald Spence at 2 that afternoon in a small office on the second floor of a building on Higgins Avenue that smelled like old paper and the specific mustiness of a space where important things were stored and not often moved. Gerald was 67 years old. A slight man with reading glasses on a cord around his neck and the careful speech of someone who measured words the way my grandfather had measured cuts of wood. He shook my hand and asked me to sit down and placed a manila envelope on the desk between us. The document inside was a trust instrument. Not a will. A revocable living trust, executed in 2012 and amended twice, most recently in 2022. My grandfather had established it quietly, outside of the family's knowledge, with Gerald as the trustee of record. The trust held the 3-acre property outside Missoula, which had been transferred into the trust in 2012 via a deed that had been recorded with Missoula County, but which Roy had apparently never found or checked for. It held the contents of the storage unit. It held a brokerage account Gerald managed on the trust's behalf that had been funded in 2012 with proceeds from the sale of a second parcel of land my grandfather had owned in Sanders County and which Roy also did not know about. The trust named me as the sole beneficiary. The house Roy had listed with his colleague's agency was not in the estate. It had been in the trust for 11 years. Roy did not have the legal authority to list it. The expedited sale authorization he had obtained from the probate court was based on a petition that did not disclose the existence of the trust or the prior deed transfer. Either he had not found the deed or he had found it and filed anyway. Gerald looked at me over his reading glasses and said, I have been waiting to make this call for 11 years. Your grandfather was a very precise man. I said I knew. Gerald said, he also had a very clear understanding of his son. I went to see Diane the next morning with Gerald's card, the photographs, and the trust instrument copy Gerald had given me. Diane read the trust document for 8 minutes without speaking. She looked up and said, quote, 8. She turned to the second page of the trust. Quote, 9. I told her I had not opened it yet. She said open it today and photograph everything. I drove to Clearwater Road that afternoon. The safe held the following. A brokerage account statement dated August of 2023. 6 weeks before my grandfather died. The account held $287,000 in index funds. A copy of the Sanders County deed from 2012 showing the original property transfer that had funded it. A sealed envelope with my name on it. And a second green composition notebook. This one filled entirely with entries dated from 2012 forward, 1 entry per year. Each one a brief account of what he had added to the trust that year and why. I read the first entry. It said, underscore underscore, quote underscore, 10 underscore underscore. I read the last entry, dated October of 2022. It said, underscore underscore, quote, underscore 1 underscore underscore underscore. I set the notebook down on the floor of the storage unit and looked at the wall for a moment. Then I picked up the sealed envelope with my name on it. I opened it. Inside was a single index card in his handwriting. It said, quote, 12. I sat on the floor of that storage unit for a while. I am not going to describe what that was like in detail, because some things belong to a person privately. I will say that when I got up, I was completely certain about what to do next, and the certainty had a specific texture that I recognized from firework, the texture of a situation that has been fully read and whose next move is clear. I had everything I needed, but I hadn't told them that yet. I want to be honest about what happened in the 3 weeks between finding the storage unit and the meeting at Diane's office, because those 3 weeks were not dramatic in the way the discovery had been. They were procedural. Diane filed a motion in the probate court to stay the house sale, pending a challenge to the court's jurisdiction, given the prior trust transfer. The stay was granted within 48 hours. The listing was suspended. Roy called me the day after the stay was granted. I did not answer. He called twice more over the next week. I did not answer those calls either. Diane had told me not to communicate directly with Roy or his attorney while the motion was pending, and I did not find this instruction difficult to follow. Diane had also requested a full accounting of all estate assets and distributions under Roy's administration. The accounting came back with a list of personal property items that had been sold or distributed, with valuations. She cross-referenced it against the trust inventory Gerald had maintained. 3 items on the distributed list appeared in the trust inventory. A set of woodworking tools valued at $4,200. A collection of first edition Western history books valued at approximately $6,000 by the dealer who had purchased them. And the coin collection, which Roy had listed in the estate accounting at $11,000, but which, when Diane pulled the dealer's purchase records through a document request, had actually sold for $19,400. And then I pulled the records, and I saw the number, and I had to sit down. Roy had distributed $11,000 from the coin collection to the family at the meeting. He had kept $8,400 as what he had characterized in an email to his own attorney, which Diane obtained through discovery as a reasonable executor's fee taken in advance. He had done this with a collection that was not in the estate. It was in the trust. He had sold trust property and pocketed part of the proceeds without disclosure to the court, to the beneficiary, or to the trust administrator. Diane called me after she received the dealer records. Her voice had the same quality it had had in every previous conversation, measured and unhurried, but there was something slightly different underneath it. She said, quote 13. She paused. Quote 14. I said I understood. She said, quote 15. Roy's attorney called Diane 4 days later. The offer was a full return of the $8,400, a deed releasing any claim to the house, and a mutual release of all claims. Diane called me and read it to me. I said no. She said, I thought so. She called him back. Everything I had gathered over those 3 weeks had been preparation for 1 room, 1 conference table, 1 morning. Diane had told me to let her lead, and I told her I would, which was true, except that I had been thinking for 2 weeks about one specific moment in that room. 1 sentence. The sentence I was going to say when Roy looked at me across the table for the first time since he had handed me the truck keys in his driveway and explained, with the patience of a man who believed he had already won, that my grandfather had wanted me to have something personal. I knew exactly when I was going to say it. I knew exactly what his face was going to do when I did. Diane and I pulled into the parking garage beneath her building at 8:43 in the morning. I remember the sound the truck made when I turned the engine off, that particular diesel silence, and then just the concrete sounds of the garage before we got out. Diane's conference room was on the 2nd floor of her building, a narrow rectangle with a window at the far end that faced the alley and let in a flat October light that made everything look slightly colorless. There was a rectangular table that seated 6, a credenza along one wall with a coffee maker nobody touched, and the specific institutional quiet of a space designed for conversations that had to be documented. It smelled like carpet cleaner and the faint cedar of a pencil someone had sharpened recently. I had been in rooms like this before, only in the abstract sense that I had been in any room where the outcome mattered. I was not uncomfortable. I sat down and put my hands flat on the table and waited. Roy and his attorney arrived 4 minutes after we did. The attorney's name was Kendrick. He was organized and professional and had the controlled effect of someone managing a situation he knew had deteriorated. Roy came in behind him. He was wearing a sport coat and the specific expression of a man who has been coached to appear reasonable and is working at it. He looked at me when he entered. He looked at me the way you look at a problem you thought you had resolved. Then he sat down and looked at Kendrick's notepad instead. Kendrick opened by acknowledging the complexity of estate administration timelines and the challenges of managing a process while a family member was on extended assignment. He used the word unfortunate twice in the first 3 minutes. He framed the accounting discrepancy as an administrative error in categorization rather than intentional misrepresentation. He spoke about Roy's years of close relationship with my grandfather and the significant personal time Roy had invested in caregiving and estate management. He presented a revised settlement offer, full restitution of the $8,400, conveyance of clear title to the house and the 3-acre property to the trust, return of the 3 items of personal property or their appraised cash value, and a waiver of executor fees going forward. I sat and listened to all of it. Diane made notes. She did not respond immediately. She let the offer sit on the table for a moment, the way you let a fire sit before you decide how to approach it, reading it, not reacting to it. Then she opened her folder and placed 3 documents on the table and pushed them toward the center. The first was the dealer's purchase receipt for the coin collection, showing the actual sale price of $19,400, alongside Roy's estate accounting showing $11,000 with the difference circled in ink. The second was the email Roy had sent his own attorney describing the $8,400 difference as a reasonable executor's fee taken in advance, printed on paper that showed the date, the sender, the recipient, and the full text. The third was a copy of the trust instrument showing that the coin collection, as personal property of the grantor transferred to the trust in 2017, had not been estate property at the time of sale. Kendrick picked up the documents in order. He read the first one. He read the second one. He set them both down and picked up the third. He read it through once, and then looked at the top of it and read the date of execution. He set it down. He looked at the table surface for a moment. Then he looked at Roy. Roy was looking at the email. His own words in 12-point font on white paper in a room he had chosen and could not leave without it. Looking like what it was. His jaw tightened once. His right hand moved to the edge of the table and he pressed 2 fingers against it, as if he was checking that it was solid. Diane said. She turned to the page in the trust instrument showing the 2017 transfer. Kendrick said he would need a moment to confer with his client. Diane said, of course. She gathered her copies of the documents and stacked them precisely, and set them in front of her and folded her hands on top of them. Roy looked at me for the first time since he had looked at me when he walked in. I said, quote, 19. I said it quietly. 1 sentence. Roy's face did the thing faces do when a piece of information enters that reorganizes everything around it, a brief stillness and then a specific kind of recognition that is not comfortable and is not meant to be. He looked at the table. He did not say anything. Kendrick said he and Roy needed 5 minutes. Diane said to take whatever they needed. They stepped into the hallway. Diane looked at her notepad and did not look at me, and I did not say anything either, and the room was very quiet. In the way rooms are quiet when something has just been said that cannot be unsaid. Outside the alley window, a delivery truck went by slowly, and its engine sound came through the glass briefly and then faded. Neither of us moved. Kendrick and Roy came back in after 7 minutes. Kendrick said his client was prepared to accept full liability for the coin collection proceeds, convey all property claims as requested, and step down as executor effective immediately, with a court-appointed neutral administrator to complete the estate process. He said his client would not contest the trust instrument or its provisions. He said his client wished to resolve this privately and completely. Diane said she would need that in writing before we left the building. Kendrick said he understood. He opened his laptop. It took 40 minutes to draft and sign the written agreement. I read every line before I signed it. Roy signed without reading it, which told me everything about the difference between us that I had never fully understood until that moment. I went to the single-stall restroom off the building's main hallway after we finished. I ran cold water over my wrists for 30 seconds. A habit from fire camps when I needed my system to reset on a timeline I chose, rather than one that was chosen for me. I looked at myself in the mirror. I looked like a person who had just done a thing that needed doing and was now deciding what to do next. I dried my hands and went back downstairs. In the parking garage, Diane stood next to the Silverado while I unlocked it. She said the neutral administrator would likely complete the estate within 4 months and that Gerald Spence would coordinate the trust distribution on a parallel timeline. She said the brokerage account had grown slightly since August and that she expected the total trust distribution to land close to $300,000 when fully settled. She said, quote, 20, quote. She was quiet for a moment. Quote, 21, quote. I said I knew. I said I was going to try to be worth it. She said. Quote, 22. She shook my hand and walked to her car. Roy did not contest anything. The written agreement held. The neutral administrator completed the estate 4 months after the conference room meeting. Roy and Barb did not attend my grandfather's memorial service, which the family held in the spring when I was home from the first rotation of fire season. 11 people came. 3 of them were people I barely knew, older neighbors of my grandfather's from the road outside Missoula, who had heard what had happened and who each said some version of the same thing. That Dale had always said his granddaughter would handle things right. I did not know he had said that to people. I have thought about it several times since. My cousin Andrea called me a week after the conference room meeting. She said she had not known about the discrepancy in the coin collection proceeds. She said she was sorry she had not asked more questions earlier. She said she did not know what to do with the distribution she had received at the family meeting. The one that had come partly from trust property. I told her to keep it. She said that didn't seem right. I said it wasn't her debt to carry. There was a long pause. And then she said she appreciated that more than she could say. We talked for another 20 minutes about things that had nothing to do with the estate. The first normal conversation I had had with anyone in that family since September. It was not fully resolved. It was a start, or it was the closest thing to a start that the situation allowed. There is one more thing I haven't told you yet. The brokerage account distributed $291,000 after fees and the estate settlement costs. I put $100,000 of it into a fire crew equipment fund I established through the Lolo National Forest Foundation, designated for gear and training support for entry-level hotshot crew members who cannot afford the startup costs, which are higher than most people understand. I named it the Dale Malone Equipment Fund. The first disbursement went out in the spring. I still work fire seasons. I am heading into my 10th year with the Lolo Hotshots in the spring. The Silverado has 162,000 miles on it and runs fine. I changed the oil and had the brakes looked at and replaced the rear left tire, and it will run for another 10 years if I take care of it, which I will, because taking care of things was what my grandfather did, and I learned it from him without either of us having to name it as a lesson. The GPS is still mounted to the dash. I have not changed the home address. It still routes to Clearwater Road when I press the button. I pressed it once, about a month after the settlement, just to check that it was